So we'll go ahead and get going here. All right, and that way I won't keep y'all here too long past like 9:45. All right, so today we're going to talk about the dangers of the two-party system in elections and public opinion. All right, and so I couldn't find any funny meme here other than with like, oh yeah, that was a great meme. I'm glad you're going to fix our country, right? And because sometimes people will post all this stuff like it's going to actually solve something. Hey Noel, um, Noel, I if you don't mind, will you tell me in the chat thing there if you went to Powdersville Middle School? I kind of think I remember you from there because I used to teach there. Um, so I don't know. Um, so today what we're gonna work on, yeah, okay. Do you remember me, Noel? I taught seventh grade social studies. And I feel like I don't know if you had my class, but I know I feel like a relative of yours. So I was like, because I saw that name your name on here, I was like, there are not that many people named Noel Pfeiffer, right? Um, so today we're going to learn how to explain how political parties work and don't work in the American system. And notice that's kind of my wording, right? Like how they work and how they don't work. And then explain how public opinion is measured and shaped. And then I need to move this little bar from the bottom here. It's getting on my nerves. Go away. Uh, and then describe the process of elections in the U.S. Okay, so that's what we're working on today. All right, I will post. Some of y'all are already communicating. That's great, but I really want to see it in the middle of the lesson. Like, do you answer and give me some feedback? So we're gonna kind of have some of that today. All right. So all work in this class is due by October 1st. I kind of don't understand why, but that's what I was told. Because we actually have another week of class after that. So why that is the case, I don't know. I just know that it is. Okay. And so hopefully somebody will explain that to me. So we have a test this week, and then we got a couple more assignments next week. I'm not real sure why that's the case, but I'm probably gonna might add something to the end of next week that wasn't on the original plan, but we'll see. All right, because I'm trying to balance not messing too much with what y'all been doing and doing what I feel is right too. Okay, so nobody stopped by for target time yesterday. I assume most of y'all know what you're doing in this class at this point, but I will open that up on Thursday to this link at 11. And yeah, and then here's my contact info. Okay, so I don't want to waste too much time on that. So there's the normal process that you've been doing during the week. I didn't mess with that just because I don't have, it a million hours to redesign the class when it's almost done. And then there is a summative test. Part of that test is okay. Thanks, Andrew. Um, is going to be what Miss Kaiser wrote based on what she taught you last week, and then part of it is based on some of the tutorial stuff from this week, and then part of it is based on what I'm teaching this week also. Okay. Um, and so what I choose to emphasize, I think you should recognize is something I think is worth you knowing. All right. And two, what I'm hoping today is that the time I spend with you will be things that you're like, okay, that actually is something that I can take into my understanding the world around me, right? So the way I designed this is that where you feel like you didn't waste your time listening to this. Okay, that's my idea. All right, so the dangers of a two-party system. Okay, so basically, we I want to see how do you move this dang thing around here. This is good. I've done it before, but there we go. Better off at the top of this class. Um, so basically, we have a bunch of other parties, but as you know, we mostly have the Republicans and Democrats, and we talked a bit about why it ends up with just two parties. But here's the point. One, we have a kind of a extreme going on where they're moving to the side, right? So the Republicans are moving more right conservative, Democrats are moving more left liberal, and it's kind of I think a couple of different views on this. This particular one right here shows they view the Democrats as having become a little more left and Republicans a lot more right, whereas this one right here has both of them moving equally left and right. And I would tend more towards this view over here. All right. And then also just like, thinking through what am I talking about here? Like it used to be back when I was younger, like maybe I was your age kind of thing back in, the 90s and 2000 or something, that you had people who were Democrats who might have been more, bigger government and more liberal, but there were, say, some Southern Democrats who were against abortion, for example. And now there's not really much of that at all. Okay. And then, take somebody who is, how many people who are really Republicans are for government spending a lot on green energy and things like that, right? So basically, there's kind of the polarizing happening then, right? And what this means is that basically, as the two parties have gotten more to the side, what you got going on here is that people are becoming less and less satisfied with the party system. So, like, you look at this poll right here, 1990, the statement, neither political party represents my views anymore, 48% of people in the US agreed and 45% disagreed. But by 2016, that was up to 61% who agreed. I would be in the agree category. Okay. There's ways in which neither party really represents me, like one or the other. And I tend to vote one certain way because I have certain values that are the more important for my voting. But I don't tend to find that either one of them really represents me that well. So kind of here's what I'm getting at here. All right. So like I would say most of the Republican Party tends to be somewhere over in this zone over here, right? Over here. And most of the Democratic Party, depending on who they are, tends to be over here somewhere, right? And so me personally, I tend to be kind of somewhere in here. All right. But then the kind of the what the deal is you have to decide, okay, well, which are the things that you I need to turn that pen off now. Go away. All right. Which are the things that, are more important to you in your voting? And then that's going to ultimately determine who you end up voting for. Okay. Um, I need to get rid of the annotations now. Go away. All right. Now, here is a just to kind of let you know what I would encourage you to do. And I sent out a bunch of links that I was going to refer to this week, in like Mr. Carter's useful links or something like that. So this is a political ideology quiz. Let me click on this here. And I would encourage you to go through and see this because sometimes people think they think a certain way about things, but then they actually go through the questions. They're like, actually, no, I don't think that way at all. But and then sometimes there's like a um you feel like you think a certain way about this, but then once you kind of weight things that are more important to you, you end up with a more of a balance a certain way or another. So, for example, um, maybe you feel like we should increase military spending, right? And then, but if you notice on here, you can put least, less, somewhat, more, or most important to you. And so, maybe you think, oh, I mean, yeah, I think so, but that's not that important to me. But then maybe you feel like it's, I don't know, we got to increase government regulations to prevent climate change. Most important, right? I mean, I don't care. You can say whatever you want to. But my point is that you go through and then this will kind of weight your rankings of who you agree with based on what you put. And then if you want to get into more kind of detailed so it gives you a more accurate result, you can actually go through and see how it says like show more foreign policy questions. So you can go through and do all of those. And then at the end, it'll show you where you are on that little political spectrum I just showed. And then what candidates are closely aligned, more closely aligned to you. And so I think that's very interesting. I would say I tend to take the quiz every couple of years because they update the issues and the stances of different candidates based on what they've said or what they voted. And I would say this doesn't determine who I vote for, but it does give me an idea of which candidates match more closely with what they've said or done versus just what their campaign says, right? And whether their ideas actually match mine on a particular issue. So your vote's going to be based on the issues that are most important to you, but it'll at least kind of give you some idea. So I would say go take that because at some point, because most of you guys are going to be old enough to vote in the 2024 election. So I think part of our problem is we got people who are old enough to vote, but they don't know anything about it, so they just listen to what the media tells them, right? So I'm telling you, be more informed. Okay. Another problem with this needs to get out of the way. Go over here. With the two-party system is what can be called the tyranny of the majority. So, a tyrant is somebody who takes power that shouldn't be theirs. So the tyranny of the majority is this. Yes, we have a government where the majority gets to pass laws. But what I want you to think about is this. If you have in a congressional election or a presidential election, if one side wins 50 to 52% of the vote, that means 48 to 50% of the people in this country don't agree with them, right? So, in other words, if we make a decision on, say pizza or something as a class, and then I don't listen to any of the people who said anything about like, hey, I'm gluten free, right? And I don't order a gluten free pizza, you'd be like, dude, that's not very nice of you, right? You didn't, yeah. So the point is, 50 to 52% of people making all the decisions and not considering the other 48%, that's not cool, right? But that's kind of what we tend to lean towards when we get the president and the two parts of Congress controlled by the same party. So what I want to point out to you is one of the things that's got a bad name in recent years that I think you need to understand actually has a lot of value is this thing called the Senate filibuster. Effectively, in the Senate, you have to have 60 votes to get laws passed to end the debate on a topic. Okay. That's actually a good thing. Here's why. If you don't have that in place, then say right now, then you have a president who's a Democrat, you have your Senate is like 51 Democrats, right? So right now we have the Congress, like the House of Representatives, is Republican controlled, so they wouldn't pass a lot of laws anyway. But let's say on the last Congress, when the Democrats controlled the House, then they would have passed whatever laws they wanted to with no check on it at all. Okay. Right now, because the Senate, but because the Senate filibuster, those laws didn't get passed. Now, with the Congress like it is now, then that would be different. But then if Republicans controlled the Congress and the president next time, then they would just go get rid of all those laws from before and pass new ones. So we'd have lots and lots of new laws that would change and flip what's happening in terms of laws in our country every 2 years. And it would just be really inconsistent. So the Senate filibuster rule provides for some kind of, like general sort of orderliness to our country in a way where we don't just go from one extreme to the other, and kind of keeps it to where it moderates to where people on both sides are relatively feel safe and their rights protected in the country. Whereas in our media and on both sides of the far ends of the political spectrum, we tend to act like, oh, they're coming for us, they're coming for us. Both sides do that, right? And so this kind of like keeping it to where you can't just make any law you want to without having a pretty strong consensus of 60 people in Senate agreeing to it is actually, pretty good thing. All right. So basically what I'm saying is that the majority forcing everybody to think and do according to their opinions first and having to compromise, that's really, dangerous. Right. And something that we got to really consider. All right. Another one is the primary process, I think actually can be pretty dangerous too. So here's what I mean. The primary is the way that the parties select their candidates. So Democrats choose their person, Republicans choose theirs. Then the candidate from each team face off in the November election. So like in 2020, you probably remember Biden was running against several people, including Bernie Sanders. And that was going on during the winter and the spring. And then obviously we had COVID too. But then during the summer, it became Biden against Trump, right? So this year, for example, in the Republican Party, you got Trump against DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Tim Scott and a few other people. And so coming in the wintertime, we're going to have a primary election. And the South Carolina presidential primary is actually pretty early, like February or March. Okay. And so if you're 18, then you can vote. You can either vote in the Democratic primary or in the Republican primary. But what that does mean, though, is yeah, you can only vote on one or the other in the spring. However, for example, if you said, okay, in 2020, if you had voted in the Democratic primary and you said, you know what, I'm going to vote for Biden because I think Sanders is this or that, right? Then you could still turn around and in the November election, vote for Trump over Biden because you didn't really want Biden either. You just really didn't want Sanders. So there's a sense in which we have open primaries, meaning you don't have to say what party you're in. You can just vote in one primary or the other. All right. And so the potential danger in the primary system, though, is that in the primaries, usually the people who vote in the, say, Democratic primary are more in line with all of Democratic thinking as opposed to moderate people in the middle of the country, right? And then the Republicans are primaries are more conservative, so they pick the extremes instead of the ones in the middle. So that's how we get more and more to the extremes of the party lines. All right. So again, the primaries are different states, different times in the spring, and by the end of the summer, both sides have their candidate chosen. Then they debate against each other and so forth and so on. Money's is you know they will only spend their money on places they think they can win. Okay, when they're campaigning. So Republicans are not going to spend much money advertising in Massachusetts in the presidential race, and Democrats don't spend a whole lot of money in Alabama because Republicans are going to win Alabama, Democrats are going to win Massachusetts, right? And the election is the first Tuesday in November on basically every 4 years, unless it's on November 1st, in which case it would be on the 8th. All right. And so that's basically the presidential campaign rule. All right. Now, another thing is that people have been talking a lot about is the electoral college. And they're like, we need to get rid of the electoral college. It's bad, it's bad, it's bad. It's not democratic. Okay. So let's kind of talk about that one. I think there's a case pro and con this, like in favor and against. So electoral college, um, the let's talk about the negatives first. You potentially can have people who win less of the popular vote who become president, and that's happened and 3 times, right? Um, and it also makes people in the states that they're going to lose the state. If you know that the candidate is going to lose your state, then why bother to vote for president? Example: you live in California, you're a Republican, you're going to lose, right? So why bother to vote? That's the idea. Okay. You live in South Carolina, you're a Democrat, you're probably going to lose. So why bother to vote, right? That kind of thing. Whereas if it was all popular vote, then it would just be whoever has the most votes. Maybe more people would feel actually the need to vote. So there's kind of these funky things within that system, but they've never, like some of those have never actually came, to be a problem. And this one's a fair one. It gives undue power to swing states. So people pay more attention to states that could go either way, which I'll show you on a map. I will say that the in favor of the electoral college is this, and I want you to consider both sides as you form your opinion instead of just listening to media. Is that with the electoral college, one of the things that it prevents is that the candidates can't just go to the big cities and only care about what they have to say. Okay. So one of the feels I get in our country is that the people out of New York and LA and Chicago and Washington, D.C. don't really care what those of us in rural South Carolina really care about or think about in the world. Okay. And when you have an electoral college, that at least means that, say, Wyoming gets 3 points towards who the president's going to be. And so they actually at least kind of have to consider what Wyoming and South Carolina and, so forth and so on care about instead of just the millions of votes. How can we get millions of votes in Philadelphia versus does every voter in Powdersville, South Carolina matter kind of thing. And so I think that there's that, and then there's also the fact that we are we're formed as a federal government, right? Like we're the states joined together, and the states having some value in our system, I think is something that is super important in at least keeping the idea of that present in our government too. So I could see the cases on both sides. Me personally, I tend to be I'm not against the electoral college personally. All right. I would say that the polls that say the majority of Americans want to get rid of it is because most people don't really understand the issue from both sides. They only hear a media side of it, and I'm telling you, that's part of what I want you to be warned of. Is just listening to the media bias on something is very concerning. I talked about this one already, and that one, and that one. Okay. All right. Now, congressional elections. There we have a bicameral legislative body, so that doesn't mean we have a camel with two humps. It means that we have two houses in Congress, right? So you have the House of Representatives, which is more responsible to the people, so it's by population, and they do it by the census every 10 years as to how many you get in your votes out of 435. South Carolina has 7. Each state has at least one representative and as many as 52, and that's California. So they're elected every 2 years. So the decisions that are made by the members of the House of Representatives, they know that their votes come back to people are thinking about how they vote and reelect them every 2 years. So they're more responsible to their people, and it's a smaller area of the state. The senators there's 2 per state, and so this is kind of interesting. Originally, the senators were elected by the state legislature, and we only changed to the 1900s to voting directly for our senators. So they hold office for 6 years, and 1/3 of them are voted for every 2 years. So it's 33 or 34 every 2 years. And so the idea is that because they are in office for longer, they're able to not worry about campaigning as much and worry about what they think is best for the nation or their state than a member of the House of Representatives as well. Also, it flips control less often since only 1/3 of them are up for election every cycle. Right. So here's the kind of the newest congressional election, like how many seats in Congress each state has. All right. So the biggest one is still California. The last census, they lost a seat. Texas got a couple more. Florida Texas got 2 more. Florida got 1 more. North Carolina got 1 more. Colorado, Montana, Oregon, and then a lot of these upper Midwestern states lost seats, as did New York. I think interesting point for you to recognize here. You can vote how you want to, but I will point out to you that some of the bigger Democratic states are losing people who are moving to the more Republican states because they're more livable and less controlled by the government. So I would like to at least point out to you that tends to be the trend, with the exception of Colorado and Oregon, and that's at least something. All right. Now, obviously, you got people leaving West Virginia too because all the jobs were in coal mining and they're shutting down, coal mining over time, kind of thing. So yeah. All right. Now, this is the last congressional election. You see all the little lines, that's the congressional districts. Okay. So blue ones are the ones held by Democrats, and red ones are the ones held by Republicans. All right. And so, we live in this one right here. Well, I do. Sorry. Some of y'all don't. All right. So some of you may live in all kinds of different ones. I forgot. I'm not teaching in Powdersville anymore. I live right here. All right. And so there's Greenville, Spartanburg, right? Then Columbia is right here, and Charleston's down here. Myrtle Beach is over here. All right. So the darker color ones are the ones that flipped in the last election. So like this one flipped from Republican to Democrat. This one flipped from Democrat to Republican. Sometimes though, these were new seats. Like that one they had 1 and now they have 2, or they redesigned the seats. So this election, it wasn't necessarily as clear that it was a flip, as it would have been, will be next time. So yeah, that kind of shows you some of the patterns there. You got Democrats in the Northeast. If you could zoom into New York City and Chicago and LA, you see a whole bunch of Democrats there, and all up down the West Coast. here's Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, some of the bigger cities like that. Detroit's right here. Um, you know, Miami is actually kind of split. And then, so that's kind of some of the bigger ones, right? Denver's right here. All right. So that's kind of some of the patterns that we have. All right. Okay. State and local elections. So state elections, you have governor, which is kind of like the president of the state, right? Like it's the executive, highest executive. Our governor's McMaster. Lieutenant governor is kind of like the vice president of a state. So like second in charge. And most states, except for Nebraska, they get to be the exception here, have a bicameral legislature also. So we have a General Assembly in South Carolina is like the House of Representatives, and then a state Senate. And other states have similar kind of processes also. And then there are all kinds of other offices voted for at a state level. Also, like you might have some places, the state superintendent of education, things like that. Cities have mayors and city councils. If you're not in a town or city, you still have a county council, which are also voted for by the people in the cities. There's the school boards, and all kinds of things like that. Right. I will point out that in a lot of areas, the election is actually decided by the primary election because of the partisan lean. So the area I live in votes 75, 77% Republican. So the winner of the Republican primary always wins. Right. If you live in downtown Columbia, the Democrat's going to always win. So the winner of the Democratic primary is going to win the local elections. Okay. So, for example, we had a county councilman who was doing a lousy job a few years ago. And to get rid of him, we had to basically vote him out in the Republican primary. It didn't mean that whether you're actually a Republican or not, if you wanted to vote out your county council guy, you had to vote in the Republican primary to get rid of him, which we did. And so now we got a guy who actually cares more about the development of the area I live in than the guy who just, didn't really care. Right. And so sometimes I think people overlook how important the local elections can be. Right. Um, Okay, public opinion, media, and the government. All right, so public opinion polls try to reflect what people think, who they will vote for, etc. But they're only as good as their sample is accurate. So sometimes the government and the media can sway or mislead the public opinion. And I do want to point out that I think it's pretty bad right now, but it's also not something that is new. So I want you to recognize that the government and the media have tried to bias people in a certain way throughout our country's history. So you don't think that's just a new thing, okay? So let me give you a little background of this because I really like history a lot. So I'm going to give you a history of the propaganda in our government and the press misleading the people. This you will not find on the tutorial reading. So in the 1770s, when the American colonists were leading towards, wanting to break away from Britain, that some of the Sons of Liberty guys were encouraging a boycott of British tea by basically saying, it would make the American men unmanly if they drank British tea, right? So that was encouraging them to boycott the British tea, right? So that's kind of like an early example of this. Another major example of this was the Spanish-American War. In large part, we get into that because of this whole, media bias thing that was encouraging people to think a certain way, famously called yellow journalism, oversimplifying. But there was this remember the Maine and to heck with Spain, only they didn't say heck there. And they claimed that Spain blew up this battleship Maine, which they probably didn't. And we use that as basically an excuse to declare war and take Spain's colonies. And just another example is propaganda. So if you'll see right here, this is Cuba was still a Spanish colony, and we got all these really sensational picture of starving Cubans and how evil the Spanish were, and we need to go save them, right? So this is the government using the media to influence public opinion in support of that war. All right, now let's come to the 20th century. Franklin Roosevelt, right, president from 1932 to 45. I want you to notice these pictures, right? The picture in the middle right here, Franklin Roosevelt standing up, looking happy and so forth. Here's Roosevelt standing up, giving a speech. What I think you should notice here, you should notice that Roosevelt, when you see him giving a speech or standing, he is always going to be. Let me get my annotations turned back on. See this right here? he is always holding on to something. That's because he could not stand unassisted. And because our country was in such a point of crisis in the Depression and then World War II, we did not want our president to look like he was weak and unable to lead. So, do you know what they did? They had a giant cover up operation where President Roosevelt was never shown sitting in his wheelchair like this. Okay. So it always was designed so that the vast majority of the American people did not know that he was crippled and could not walk without assistance. And so basically, they were controlling the image that was given of our leader to our people in a way that was really dishonest, right? So, just to, again, like this is not something new, dishonest portrayals of our leaders. All right. All right, let's talk about more recent, like in wars. The Vietnam War, the government wasn't telling the whole truth about how the war was going for a long time. And with some of that stuff that was going on, Americans started to distrust our government. Afghanistan, we've learned now that a lot of the war going on there, the reporting on what was going on over time was not accurate. I think in Afghanistan, we were there, I think, for a very good reason to begin with, but how our government was reporting on, quote unquote progress was not was not accurate. So that's built up a lot of distrust of the government and their reporting of information, how they use the media for that. So today, the government is clearly controlling the media information that's given us on a few topics. All right. This one with the COVID thing, like there's no doubt now that they restricted what information was out there. I sent y'all a link to this thing called the Twitter files that was reporting how the government was using Twitter to control what was put out there and were kind of muffling contrary opinions that were unpopular to what the CDC and Dr. Fauci and all them were saying in 2020 and 2021. A lot of evidence that there was covering up what we were able to see and how they were filtering what information got out there. And there's also been a lot of media in control of information about Trump and Biden and finding ways to shut down the views that don't fit their narratives. You can look up the New York Post article on Hunter Biden and how they refused to publish that before the 2020 election when they would put, there was publishing of all kinds of stuff on the junk on Donald Trump, but then they came up with these standards of information to prevent the Hunter Biden stories from being posted that now even the old Twitter CEO, Jack Dorsey, admits was a mistake. That they should have not filtered that story. And so when people are saying, man, I don't trust the media, I don't trust the government to not try to control the media, there's something to that, man. Like, I'm not saying that both sides wouldn't do it. I'm just telling you that you have the real, I think, responsibility to be at least somewhat skeptical that are they telling me the whole story? Because everybody's got their own narrative they want to present. You got to think for yourself. That's what I'm saying. I don't care who you vote for or which side you support. You just need to know what you're standing for when you do it. Okay. All right. Now, kind of towards the end here, private ownership of media. That's a good thing, right? Meaning, so public ownership would be like if the government controlled your radio stations and your TV and your internet and stuff like that. So it's good that our country does not have that, and other countries do have that. So that's a good thing. However, what I want you to see here, and this is a not partisan site that I'm posting off of here called allsides.com. And I sent this link out too. I think it's fascinating. Allsides.com goes through and has people rate as to where they think the different sources of information are. So this is based on the feel of millions of votes of people as to the bias of particular sites. All right. And so I do want to point out to you that here's the bias of the main TV channels. All right. New York Times is another major one right here. NPR is government funded news, but leans left. Okay. Paid for by taxpayer dollars. Washington Post, USA Today. If you ever been in a hotel, they would have USA Today. That's left leaning. Your CBS right here. Associated Press is where all the stories are filtered through on any other websites, right? Um, for example, I live in the upstate, and WIFF, their website, posts their stories are written by CNN. Okay. The Anderson Independent and Greenville News people are employed by, like, their news folks are USA Today people. So the point is that most of the main news sources are from the left. Okay. The main right wing source is Fox News. Right. Wall Street Journal's another one. National Review, New York Post is a right wing site. Um, and then these, I personally like reading Real Clear Politics because they will post sources and articles and opinion articles from various perspectives, and then I can decide for myself. Right. And so I do want you to recognize that it there is a major slant among the intellectual elite type people in Washington and New York and LA and all that that are definitely left leaning. I don't care if you vote left or right, if you vote Democratic or Republican, that's up to you. But I want you to understand what, if you read different sources, where they are trying to push or sway the stories. Um, I just want you to kind of recognize what's going on with that. All right. Let me go back here. So one thing I want to show you here, and I did link this, but I want to go ahead and um, pull one of these up here. So if I go to, let's see, we'll go to allsides.com. So here's the media bias chart. I posted y'all a link to this. It's going to load here. And where's the chart? Where are your charts? It's on this page. It's just not. Oh, it's still loading. It's being slow probably because I'm running the Zoom. Yeah, here it comes. Yeah, there it is. All right. And then also, so like one of the things I think is pretty cool about this is you can go on their news part of their site here. And what they've done here, I think is really cool, is they will have a certain story, okay, on a certain topic. And then they're going to give you, let's say, a worker strike. Okay. You click on that worker strike, then it's going to give you a story from the left wing, from the center, and then from the right. Okay. So, like a conservative take on this story, a liberal take on the story, and a central take on that story. Okay. Right here. US adds so many jobs, fewer than expected. Okay. So then here's a center bias story. Here's a right bias story. And I'm sure there's a left one. Here's a left story, right? So basically, you see how the left story is titled US job growth cooled in August. Here's what that means for inflation and interest rates. Makes it sound not that bad. Then a right wing story says private sector job growth cools sharply in August to 177,000, worse than expected. So you see how much sharper the language is on that wording from one version versus the other. Okay. And so that's what I want you to get here is that if you're reading your stuff from one source versus the other, kind of how that's being presented to you is going to influence how you think about it if you're not careful. Okay. And so that's why I wanted to give you some sources on that. Okay. So kind of as we wrap up here, all right, I want you to tell me something you learned or found interesting from today's topic. I would like to know and just kind of see what you're picking up from that, what you learned from that, what you vibing with, or you're like, okay, or like, yeah, I don't know about that, right? Tell me what you're thinking here. Just kind of like to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things to me is how differently things can be portrayed, the same actual core information, depending on how it's portrayed, can really make a difference on how you feel about it, right? Different perspectives, different bias is, I think, really important. All right, so I'm gonna wrap up real quick. Let's see. Showed us how parts of states and whole states. Okay, cool. Yeah, I do think that's really interesting. Two-party system works. Yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of like there's a lot of really good stuff that is stuff that like people. I tried to go over some stuff that like when you hear things really help you to see what the heck matters about this, because some of this stuff when they're talking about the filibuster, for example, like why does this matter? Like it actually matters a lot. And so I don't, regardless of, I will say with the filibuster, regardless if you are a Republican or Democrat, understanding that stability in government is actually really important as opposed to swinging from side to side a lot. And that our government is designed to be kind of stable. So, like, if you think about it, sometimes people complain our government doesn't get anything done. The question is, do you really want it to get a whole lot done, or do you want them to just to make sure the country doesn't fall apart and let us mind our own business and do our thing, right? And so, in a sense, I don't know how much we really want them to do stuff, right? Maybe they should just, if they don't do a whole lot and just make sure that no crisis happens, maybe that's not so bad, right? So maybe it's designed to not get whatever one side or the other wants done. Maybe that's not so bad after all, right? That's what I kind of want y'all to think about. Which I guess what I'm saying is I don't know that that is a view that has to have one party the other is what I'm saying. Um, so yeah. All right. So what you need to get done here this week is the tutorial mastery quiz, which I didn't mess with the process of that. And then I'm going to unlock your Unit 3 test. Make sure you're prepared. If you do badly on it, here's something I am going to switch up is I'm going to make you write out explanations of what you missed to re-unlock the quiz and do it again, or the test and do it again. Because I want it to be something that you want to look through your stuff beforehand and make sure you get it right. Honestly, I think that will help you with some responsibility and actually, studying and trying to learn material. Okay. All right. That being said, any last questions? And otherwise, we gonna go. All right. I'll see you guys on Monday. Y'all let me know if you need anything in the meantime.